The year is 1973. You are standing in the crypt beneath Wawel Cathedral in Krakow, watching a team of Polish archaeologists pry open a stone sarcophagus that has been sealed for nearly 500 years. The air inside is stale, the limestone is cold under your fingers, and the moment the lid shifts, just a centimeter, something invisible pours out. No one feels it, no one smells it, no one reacts. Within days, the first researcher falls ill, then another, then another. Over the following months, 15 members of the team that opened the tomb of King Casimir IV will be dead. Strokes, infections, organ failure. The press will call it the Polish curse of the pharaohs. But the truth is worse than any curse, because this one has a species name, and Casimir is only the beginning. Across 10 objects and 5 centuries, we are going to trace a pattern that connects royal crypts to shrunken heads, radioactive masks to a 5,000-year-old limestone goddess. These are not ghost stories. They are forensic cases. Objects that ruined lives, ended careers, and killed people. Some through biology, some through chemistry, and some through mechanisms that science still refuses to name. 10 objects, 10 case files. The evidence is in the glass cases. The question is whether you want to look.
The sarcophagus had been sealed in 1492, the year Columbus sailed west. King Casimir IV, one of the longest reigning monarchs in Polish history, had died, and his body had begun decomposing faster than expected. The burial team panicked. They packed the remains in quicklime, sealed the stone lid, and walked away. For 481 years, nothing moved inside that tomb. The air did not circulate, the moisture did not escape, and something grew. When the archaeological team finally opened the sarcophagus in 1973, they were not expecting danger. This was a routine excavation, part of a broader survey of royal burials beneath Wawel Cathedral. The lead researchers included Felix Dawidowski and Czesław Orzechowski, both among Poland's most respected archaeologists. Neither would survive the year. The deaths came fast. Some researchers suffered sudden strokes. Others developed aggressive respiratory infections that overwhelmed their immune systems within days. 15 people in total. The media compared it immediately to the Tutankhamun curse, a connection that turned out to be more accurate than anyone realized at the time. It took a microbiologist named Bolesław Smyk, working at the Polish Academy of Sciences, to crack the case. Smyk collected samples from the interior of the tomb and cultured them. What he found was Aspergillus flavus, a fungus that produces aflatoxins, among the most potent naturally occurring carcinogens and immunosuppressants on Earth. The sealed environment had not killed the spores. It had preserved them. 5 centuries of darkness and stillness had turned the sarcophagus into a biological pressure cooker. The skeptics had a reasonable objection. Can fungal spores really survive 500 years without a fresh nutrient source? Smyk's analysis showed they could. Dormant in layers of calcium dust, waiting. Not alive in any meaningful sense, but not dead either. This was the first time in history that a so-called mystical curse received a direct, laboratory-confirmed biological explanation. The supernatural had a Latin name, and it was patient. Something about that patience unsettles me more than any ghost story. I have a nose for things that wait in the dark. Call it professional training. And a 500-year-old organism that can outlast every human being who sealed it away is not supernatural. It is worse. It is natural. The fungus in Krakow killed 15 people in the 20th century. But the most famous version of this story began half a century earlier, in a valley carved into the rock of southern Egypt. You have heard of the curse of the pharaohs. Everyone has. But what you likely have not heard is the detail that turned a tabloid sensation into a genuine medical mystery. In 1922, British archaeologist Howard Carter, funded by Lord Carnarvon, broke through the sealed doorway of Tomb 62 in the Valley of the Kings. Inside was the most intact royal burial ever found in Egypt. Gold, lapis lazuli, a solid gold death mask weighing over 10 kilograms. The tomb of Tutankhamun. Lord Carnarvon entered the burial chamber with Carter. Weeks later, a mosquito bit him on the cheek.
The bite became infected. He developed a fever, then pneumonia, then septicemia. He died in Cairo on April 5, 1923. Now, here is the detail Carter recorded in his personal excavation diaries, held at the Griffith Institute in Oxford. When researchers later examined the mummy of Tutankhamun, they found a lesion on the left cheek, in the same location as Carnarvon's fatal mosquito bite. Identical spot. No one has adequately explained this. The day Carnarvon died, every electric light in Cairo went dark. A citywide blackout. No cause was ever identified. Back in England, Carnarvon's dog, a fox terrier, howled once and dropped dead. These are not embellishments. They are documented in contemporary accounts from multiple sources. The press invented a dramatic inscription: "Death shall come on swift wings to those who disturb the sleep of the pharaoh." No such inscription existed on the tomb entrance, but there was a real warning on an interior wall, a text referencing flame that would consume the trespasser. It was ignored at the time. Arthur Mace, Carter's right hand during the excavation, died of pleurisy, complaining of a crushing pressure in his chest that no doctor could explain. 6 members of the core excavation team died within a decade. The scientific explanation mirrors Krakow exactly. Sealed chambers, no ventilation, Aspergillus niger spores, and elevated concentrations of radon gas, both confirmed in studies of unventilated Egyptian tombs. Carter himself lived another 16 years, but suffered chronic lymphomas that some researchers now attribute to prolonged fungal exposure. The rational explanation is airtight. Sealed chambers breed pathogens. Compromised immune systems respond poorly to massive spore exposure. Every death can be mapped to a known pathological mechanism. No supernatural agent required. Except the mosquito bite. The scar on the mummy's cheek, in the exact same spot where an insect punctured Carnarvon's skin. That detail does not fit any epidemiological model. It is a coincidence so specific that it feels engineered. Not proof of anything, but the kind of fact that sticks in your throat at 2 in the morning. Prince Ali Kamel Fahmy Bey, who visited the tomb shortly after its opening, was shot dead by his wife in a London hotel room. Skeptics correctly point out that domestic violence does not require a pharaoh's intervention. But the list of visitors who met violent or premature ends grew long enough that even Howard Carter, a man who publicly dismissed the curse, stopped giving interviews about it in his final years. Was it a curse? Or was it a 5,000-year-old biosecurity system that nobody recognized as one? And does the answer to that question actually change anything for the people who opened a tomb and never recovered? The connection between Krakow and the Valley of the Kings is not metaphorical. It is mycological. The same genus, Aspergillus, sealed inside 2 royal tombs, 3,000 miles and 3,000 years apart, producing the same result. And the third case makes the pattern undeniable. In 1976, the mummy of Ramesses II, the longest reigning pharaoh in Egyptian history, was flown to Paris. Not for exhibition, for emergency medical treatment. Curators at the Cairo Museum had noticed something alarming. The mummy was deteriorating. The wrappings were discoloring. The preserved skin was cracking in ways that suggested active biological degradation, not the slow erosion of millennia, but something feeding on the remains. A team at the National Museum of Natural History in Paris, the Muséum National d'Histoire Naturelle, conducted a full microbiological survey. They identified 89 species of fungi colonizing the mummy's surface. The dominant strain, Aspergillus flavus. The same species Smith had found in Krakow. The same family Carter's team had inhaled in Luxor. The fungus was consuming the resins and linen bindings, converting Ramesses into a spore factory. The solution was extraordinary. The mummy was transported to a nuclear research facility in Saclay, a town southwest of Paris, and subjected to controlled gamma irradiation. The radiation sterilized the fungal colonies without damaging the preserved tissue. I will be honest, I have spent more time than is reasonable reading about the logistics of irradiating a 3,000-year-old pharaoh. And the detail that I keep coming back to is not the gamma rays, it is the paperwork. Ramesses II is the only mummy in history to have been issued a national passport. The Egyptian government required it for the transfer,
Occupation listed, king. Status, deceased. 3 tombs, 3 continents, 3 centuries of openings. The same invisible killer. And here is where it stops being coincidence and starts being a pattern. The priests who sealed these chambers did not know the word aspergillus. They did not understand spore biology or immunosuppression. But they knew the tombs were dangerous. They said it with curses, with warnings carved in stone, with stories designed to keep people away. And for thousands of years, it worked. Here is my observation for what it is worth. We have spent a century laughing at ancient warnings. Curses are superstition. Tomb inscriptions are theater. But when a microbiologist in Krakow and a mycology team in Paris independently find the same organism sealed inside the same kind of chamber, maybe the ancients were not wrong about the danger. Maybe they were only wrong about the mechanism. And maybe the difference between a curse and a diagnosis is just vocabulary. The real question is not whether the curse is real. It is whether the ancients understood microbiology in a language we dismissed as superstition. Leave the crypts behind. Where we are going now, there are no fungi, no spores, no microscopes, only stone, and a face carved into it 5,000 years ago. The Lady of Lea sits behind thick glass in the National Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh. She is small, barely a foot tall, carved from soft limestone, cross-shaped arms, a thick neck, no face. She looks like a fertility idol, and archaeologists confirm that is exactly what she is. A Chalcolithic figurine from roughly 3,500 years before the Common Era, excavated near the village of Lempa on the western coast of Cyprus in 1878. The official record ends there. The unofficial record begins with a body count. According to accounts compiled in the Cyprus Mail and repeated in curatorial notes, the first documented owner, a Lord Elfont, lost all 7 members of his family within 6 years of acquiring the statue. The second owner, Ivor Minucci, reportedly lost his family within 4. The figurine was eventually donated to the museum by the sons of Sir Alan Beaverbrook, after the death of their entire immediate family. The chief curator of the department that received the donation died of a sudden illness within 12 months. Now, I want to be careful here. The names in this legend are difficult to verify independently. Skeptics in Cyprus have argued that some may be fabricated or embellished to enhance the artifact's mystique. No peer-reviewed study has confirmed a causal link between the statue and any death. This is firmly in the territory of legend, level 4 on any credibility scale. Yet the museum staff in Edinburgh do not handle the statue without necessity. And when it was loaned to the Getty Museum in 1990 for a temporary exhibition, curators there described it on record as disquieting, noting an unusual emotional response among visitors who stood near it for extended periods. What are we looking at? A 5,000-year-old limestone carving that archaeologists classify as a fertility symbol, and that 4 families insist brought them nothing but death. The science says there is no mechanism. No toxins, no spores, no radiation, nothing measurable. The pattern says there might not need to be one. I will admit something. Of all the cases on this list, this one frustrates me the most. Not because the evidence is convincing, it is not, but because the absence of evidence is itself a kind of data. 4 families across over a century, all reporting the same outcome. You can call it confirmation bias. You can call it selective memory. You can also call it a sample size that would get a graduate student's attention. 11,500 years ago, someone in what is now the Ural Mountains of Russia felled a freshly grown larch tree. They carved it into a plank over 5 meters tall. And then they covered it in faces. The Shagir idol was pulled from a peat bog near Yekaterinburg in 1890 and has baffled researchers ever since. It is the oldest known wooden sculpture on Earth, older than the Egyptian pyramids by a factor of 2, older than Stonehenge by more than 6,000 years. And it is covered in geometric patterns and carved faces that no one can decode. The original recovery was chaotic.
Miners at a gold processing site found fragments scattered through the waterlogged peat. The pieces were reassembled, but not all of them survived. A portion of the idol, possibly containing additional faces or symbols, was lost during the Soviet era. The full original height was 5.3 meters. What remains is stored in a sealed glass sarcophagus filled with inert gas at the Sverdlovsk Regional Museum. 8 distinct faces, researchers call them licheni, are carved at different levels along the body. Some face outward, some face inward. The prevailing interpretation is that this represents a cosmological model, a vertical map of spiritual realms stacked like floors in a building. But that is speculation. The honest answer is that nobody knows what the faces mean, who they represent, or what the geometric code between them signifies. The carving technique itself is remarkable. Whoever made this did not chip away at the wood. They used stone tools to inscribe lines with the precision of someone who had practiced the same gestures hundreds of times. The patterns are not random. They repeat, but with variations, the way a written language uses familiar symbols in different combinations. Mikhail Zhilin, a researcher at the Russian Academy of Sciences, has argued that the markings encode information with the same structural logic as early writing systems.
Not writing itself, but something functionally equivalent, created 6,000 years before the Sumerians pressed the first cuneiform into wet clay. The portion of the idol lost during the Soviet era haunts the research. Whatever was carved on those missing sections may have completed a pattern that the surviving fragments only hint at. We are reading a book with pages torn out, and we are not even sure which language it was written in. In 2014, a German research team conducted new radiocarbon dating that pushed the idol's age back even further than previous estimates, landing it firmly in the Mesolithic. The announcement made international news. The Guardian called it the world's oldest wooden statue, twice as old as the pyramids. And here is what unsettles me about the Shagir idol more than any curse on this list. This is not a dangerous object. No one has died from touching it. No fungal colonies lurk inside the wood. The threat it poses is entirely cognitive. It carries a message, a structured, intentional, encoded message that human beings have been staring at for over 130 years. And we cannot read a single word of it. The faces look back at us, and they say nothing we can understand. If that is not a curse, it is at least a very effective silence. 14,700 years ago, inside a limestone cave in Somerset, England, someone picked up a human skull and began to work. The skull cups of Goff's cave were discovered in 1987 and analysed in detail by Sylvia Bello, a paleoanthropologist at the Natural History Museum in London. Her findings, published in the Journal of Human Evolution, are precise and clinical. The skulls were defleshed using flint blades. The facial bones were removed. The cranial vault was then carefully shaped, the edges smoothed and beveled, to create a vessel suitable for drinking. This was not the work of starvation. The cuts are deliberate, consistent, and skilled. Whoever did this had done it before. Bello's analysis confirmed the presence of human tooth marks on the bones and evidence that marrow had been extracted. The skulls belonged to individuals of different ages. One was a child. These are the oldest confirmed ritual vessels made from human remains anywhere in Europe. Similar cups, called kapalas, still feature in certain Tibetan Buddhist ceremonies today. But the Goff's cave specimens predate any known cultural parallel by thousands of years. Think about the scale of time involved. When someone carved this child's skull into a drinking cup, the English Channel did not exist. Britain was still connected to continental Europe by a land bridge. Woolly mammoths still grazed within walking distance of this cave. And yet, the craftsmanship is not primitive. It is meticulous. The debate among anthropologists is not about what happened. The evidence is unambiguous. The debate is about why. Was this an act of honor? A way of keeping the dead present? Of drinking alongside an ancestor? Or was it domination? A trophy taken from an enemy, a vessel designed to humiliate even in death. Bello's team noted one suggestive detail. The skulls showed no signs of combat trauma. No blade marks on the outer cranium. No blunt force impact. Whatever killed these individuals, it was not a battle. That shifts the interpretation slightly toward ritual rather than warfare, but not conclusively. The bones do not answer. They never do. But the craftsmanship does tell us one thing. Whoever made these cups did not consider what they were doing to be savage. They took their time. They were careful. They treated the skull the way a potter treats clay, as raw material for something meaningful. What meaning exactly we have lost? And that may be the oldest curse of all. Not malice, but forgetting. This next case does not involve ancient temples or sealed crypts. It involves a man in Idaho who is terrified of two small bronze statues. In 2012, the Museum of Idaho in Idaho Falls received an anonymous donation. Inside the package, wrapped not in museum-grade material but in paper towels, were two bronze figurines. One depicted Isis, the other depicted Horus. Both were authenticated as genuine, late dynastic period artifacts, dating to roughly 600 years before the Common Era. The donor had owned them since 1996. In the 16 years that followed, he lost 3 businesses, survived 3 divorces, and endured a serious illness. He was convinced the statues were responsible. He shipped them to the museum because he could no longer bear to hold them. Rod Hansen, the museum director, initially assumed the objects were reproductions. The story sounded too theatrical. But laboratory analysis confirmed the bronze composition and patination were consistent with late-period Egyptian manufacture. The objects were real. The donor believed they came from the tomb of Tutankhamun, a claim with no supporting evidence. More likely, they originated from the burial of an unnamed official during the 26th dynasty. The donor also tied the statues to a family story about his grandfather and the financial crash of 1929, though the dates in his account did not line up. The museum now displays the figurines rarely, mostly during private evening events marketed as Museum After Dark. Hansen, in a recorded talk from 2018, described the donor's final communication. He said the statues wanted to go back to their own kind. Personally, I think the most revealing detail here is not the alleged curse, it is the paper towels. A man who owned these objects for 16 years could not bring himself to wrap them properly. That level of fear, physical, irrational, urgent, is its own kind of evidence. Not of the supernatural, of what belief does to people when it has nowhere else to go. There is one artifact on this list that I have a personal stake in, and before you say anything, yes, I am aware of the irony. In the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum in St. Augustine, Florida, behind a glass panel mounted on a wall, hangs a small rug. It is old. It is fragile. And it is made entirely from cat fur. The rug was reportedly removed from a mummified human foot, a foot that is also in the collection, stored separately. The legend attached to it states that anyone who steps on this rug will die in agony. The museum solved the problem by hanging it vertically, behind glass, where nobody's feet can reach it. The material has been confirmed as feline hair. The provenance before the museum is almost entirely undocumented. No chain of ownership, no verified deaths, no forensic analysis of the curse. Museum staff have noted anecdotally that service animals, particularly guide dogs, sometimes become agitated or distressed near the display case. Now the evidence here is thinner than anything else on this list. No lab results, no body count, no peer-reviewed paper. By any reasonable standard, this should not be here, but I keep coming back to it. A rug woven from the fur of cats, wrapped around a human foot, sealed inside a tomb, and now hanging in a Florida roadside attraction behind glass. There is something about that trajectory that feels less like a curse and more like a very long, very dark joke. And I have learned over the course of this channel not to ignore the ones that make the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Occupational instinct. The heads are small, smaller than you expect. The skin is dark, almost black, shrunken tight against the bone. The eyes are sewn shut with plant fiber. The mouth is sewn shut too, stitched closed in a tight vertical line. This was the point. The entire purpose of the tzantza, the shrunken head, was containment. The Shuar people of eastern Ecuador and northern Peru
believed that killing an enemy released a vengeful spirit called the musak. If the spirit escaped, it would hunt the killer. The only way to trap it was to shrink the head, seal the eyes, seal the mouth, and lock the musak inside forever. The Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford held 12 tsansa for over a century. 7 were identified as human, 5 as animal. Of the 7 human heads, only 3 were determined to be ritually authentic, meaning they had been created in the context of actual Shwa warfare. The rest were fakes, commercial products, manufactured from unclaimed bodies in Panamanian morgues in the early 20th century and sold to Western collectors hungry for the exotic. In 2020, the museum removed all 120 human remains from public display. The shrunken heads were moved to closed storage. The glass case where they had sat was replaced with explanatory texts about repatriation ethics. Think about what that vitrine looked like for 100 years. Fluorescent light buzzing overhead. Schoolchildren pressing their noses to the glass. Gift shop postcards. And inside, 7 human faces with their mouths stitched shut. 4 of them stolen from the dead of another culture. 3 of them manufactured from bodies that nobody claimed. The Shwa were unambiguous about what the museum had been doing. Displaying the heads was an act of spiritual violence against their ancestors. The musak were not museum curiosities. They were trapped souls. And by putting them under glass and fluorescent light, the museum had turned imprisonment into entertainment. The unresolved question is what happens to the fakes. The Shwa want them destroyed or buried, despite the fact that they were not made by Shwa hands and the individuals whose bodies were used were not Shwa people. This creates a legal and ethical paradox that no existing framework can resolve. Who speaks for the unnamed dead of a Panamanian morgue? Who buries them? And does a fraudulent sacred object carry the same spiritual weight as a genuine one? The mouths are still sewn shut. No one has asked them. This is where the investigation turns, because everything before this point involved objects that were dangerous when they were made. Sealed tombs full of spores, shrunken heads holding trapped spirits, fungi that survived millennia. This last case is different. These objects were not dangerous when they were made. They became dangerous because of us. Under a federal law called the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, signed in 1990, American museums are required to return sacred objects and human remains to their tribes of origin. The law was a long overdue correction. For over a century, museums had acquired indigenous ceremonial items through means ranging from purchase to outright theft. The act was designed to undo that damage. It created new damage instead. For roughly 100 years, museum conservators had been treating sacred masks, headdresses, and ceremonial garments with pesticides to prevent insect damage. Arsenic, mercury compounds, industrial-grade pesticides that would later be banned worldwide. The chemicals were standard practice. The objects survived beautifully, and no one considered even once that the people those objects were being returned to would put them on their faces. The Hopi tribe, the Navajo. Dozens of nations across North America received their ancestors' sacred regalia under the Repatriation Act and began using them in ceremonies as they were always meant to be used. Masks pressed against skin, headdresses resting on hair, garments worn for hours during rituals in enclosed spaces. The arsenic was still there. Under a specific provision of the Code of Federal Regulations, museums are legally required to disclose any known hazardous treatments. But records from the 19th and early 20th centuries are fragmentary at best. Many museums simply do not know which objects were treated or with what. The Smithsonian Institution archives contain documented cases where returned items had to be sealed in lead-lined containers due to radiation or chemical contamination levels that exceeded safe handling thresholds. The Hopi refused to decontaminate. Their position was precise and unwavering. Scientific intervention would kill the spirit of the object. Cleaning the arsenic meant destroying the sacred purpose. Some masks are now so toxic that they cannot be photographed without protective equipment. Yet the ceremonies they were made for require skin contact.
A mask designed to connect a person to the spirit world now requires a hazmat suit to handle safely. And this is not a handful of objects. The scale of pesticide use in American museums to the 20th century was industrial. Nearly every natural history collection in the country treated organic materials, feathers, hide, wood, fiber, with some combination of arsenic compounds, mercuric chloride, naphthalene, or worse. The objects that survived look pristine. The chemicals are invisible, and the records, in many cases, are gone. I have read more on this than I should have. The files that are public, the hearings, the tribal council's statements. And there is one observation I cannot shake. In 3 of the 10 cases on this list, the danger came from biology. Fungal spores sealed in darkness. In 2, the danger came from belief. Objects said to carry curses that science cannot detect. But in this case, the danger came from preservation. The very institutions built to protect cultural heritage became the instruments that poisoned it. The curators who dusted these masks with arsenic in 1910 thought they were saving them. They were loading a weapon that would not fire for 80 years. How many returned objects have caused illness in the communities that receive them? The official statistics are sealed, classified under tribal sovereignty and medical privacy protections. Advocates say the number is not 0, and the tribes have a word for what happened. Not contamination, not negligence, desecration. 10 objects, 10 case files. A fungus that killed 15 scientists in Krakow. A pharaoh whose mosquito bite matched a wound on a 3,000-year-old mummy. A wooden idol covered in faces that have been speaking for 11,500 years in a language no one alive can read. Some of these objects are dangerous because of what is inside them: spores, toxins, trapped spirits. And some are dangerous because of what we did to them: sealed them, preserved them, poisoned them, and then handed them back. The line between a curse and a consequence is thinner than you think. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing about an ancient object is not the past it carries, but the future we gave it. Which of these 10 do you find hardest to explain away? Pick one. Make your case in the comments. The most convincing argument gets pinned. Subscribe. The next investigation is already open, and the evidence is worse.